Have you ever been underestimated, cast aside, and left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life? This is the story of a woman who didn't just rise from the ashes of betrayal. She built an empire from them. The chandeliers glimmered like frozen waterfalls above the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel. Polished marble floors reflected every flicker of light, every shimmer of sequins and satin. Waiters moved like shadows, carrying champagne flutes that sparkled like liquid gold. Tonight was not just any evening. It was the Vidian Dynamics annual gala. A night when the city's wealthiest, most influential, and most ruthless gathered under one roof. Deals were whispered in corners, cameras clicked, and reputations were either cemented or destroyed. At the center of it all stood Adrian Calloway, the formidable CEO of Vidian Dynamics. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a black tuxedo with a midnight blue satin lapel, and wore the smirk of a man who believed he owned the night. But what made every eye follow him wasn't just his commanding presence. It was the woman on his arm. Tessa, 24, was striking in a crimson silk gown that clung to her like a second skin. Her laughter rang loud and sharp, slicing through the murmurs of old money like a blade. She was the reason Adrian's marriage had collapsed, the mistress he had chosen over his wife of 8 years. Tonight, he flaunted her openly, parading her in front of investors, colleagues, and even longtime friends who once admired his marriage. It was a bold declaration. Adrian had traded the familiar for the thrilling, the loyal for the ambitious. "Smile, darling," he whispered into Tessa's ear as flashbulbs popped around them. She obeyed, flashing the cameras a smile polished for social media, her manicured hand resting possessively on his chest. For Adrian, tonight was not about charity or the company. It was about victory. He had crushed competitors this quarter, expanded Vidian's influence overseas, and now he wanted everyone to see that his personal life was just as enviable. In his mind, the gala was his kingdom, and every eye in the room was proof that he was untouchable. But then, a hush spread across the hall. It started near the grand entrance, where 2 doormen in white gloves pushed open the towering double doors. The sound of violins seemed to falter, as if even the orchestra sensed the shift in the atmosphere. Guests turned, whispers rippling through the crowd like waves breaking on the shore. And there she was. Iris, Adrian's ex-wife. She walked in slowly, her emerald silk gown flowing like water around her every step. The dress shimmered under the chandeliers, hugging her figure with an understated elegance that screamed confidence. A diamond necklace rested lightly against her collarbone, catching the light with each breath she took. Her red hair, once worn in quiet domestic styles, now cascaded in polished waves down her back. Her presence was undeniable, poised, radiant, and impossibly self-assured. For a year after the divorce, Adrian had told himself she was broken, living in the shadows, begging for relevance. He had convinced himself that she was nothing without him. But tonight, seeing her stride into the ballroom, every ounce of his confidence faltered. And she was not alone. Walking beside Iris was Alexander Blackwell, a billionaire investor and Adrian's fiercest competitor in the tech world. Known for his ruthless acquisitions and sharp intellect, Alexander rarely appeared at public events with company. Yet tonight, his arm was linked with Iris's. His tall frame bent slightly toward her, as though protecting her from the predatory eyes of the crowd. Gasps spread across the ballroom. Cameras swiveled, abandoning Adrian in an instant. Guests who had been praising Adrian seconds earlier now craned their necks to catch a glimpse of Iris with Alexander. The narrative of the evening shifted in a single, stunning heartbeat. Adrian's smirk froze on his face. He gripped his champagne glass tighter, his knuckles whitening. Tessa whispered something in his ear, but he couldn't hear her over the roaring in his own. His eyes were locked on Iris. His Iris, looking more powerful, more beautiful, and more alive than he had ever remembered. She didn't falter under his stare. Instead, she met his gaze across the crowded ballroom with a look of quiet, chilling triumph. And then, in one smooth motion, Alexander leaned down, his lips brushing her cheek before settling into a lingering kiss that sent shockwaves through the room. The photographers erupted, their flashes turning the moment into blinding fireworks. Gasps echoed, followed by the rapid tapping of fingers on phones as the scandal spread across social media in real time. Adrian's jaw tightened, his grip on Tessa loosened. The proud smile he had worn all evening drained from his face, replaced with something no one had seen before. Fear. Because in that instant, Adrian understood the truth. The night was no longer his. And as Iris and Alexander moved further into the ballroom, every head turned toward them, not him. Conversations shifted. Investors drifted away from Adrian. Their curiosity was piqued by the sight of the ex-wife he had discarded, now being embraced by the one man he feared most. The orchestra resumed, but the air was different now. It was charged, dangerous, and electric. Adrian tried to mask his panic with another sip of champagne, but the tremor in his hand betrayed him. Tessa tugged at his sleeve, irritation flashing in her eyes, as if she realized that in one entrance, Iris had stolen every ounce of the spotlight she had craved. Adrian forced a laugh, but it was brittle and hollow. He leaned down to whisper to Tessa, his voice cracking. "It's nothing, just an entrance. She means nothing." But his eyes told another story. His eyes betrayed the truth. He was shaken to his very core. And across the room, Iris tilted her head, her lips curving into the faintest knowing smile, as though she could read every desperate thought racing through his mind. The gala had only just begun. But Adrian already sensed it. He was no longer the king of this night. And when Iris finally opened her mouth to speak, he realized he might not even survive it. Before the emerald gown, before the diamond necklace, before the cameras turned her into the center of the gala, Iris Calloway had lived a very different life. A life that was quiet, humble, and painfully small compared to the glittering chaos of the St. Regis ballroom. To understand why her presence stunned Adrian into silence, you have to know who Iris used to be and how she was broken before she found the strength to rise again. Iris had grown up in a modest two-bedroom house in Queens. Her father, a construction worker, spent long days pouring concrete on city projects. Her mother worked part-time at a bakery, waking at dawn to knead dough before Iris even left for school. There was no luxury, no spare money, but there was an abundance of love. And that love fueled Iris's determination. She studied hard, put herself through design school with scholarships and late-night shifts waiting tables, and dreamed of opening her own interior design studio one day. That dream paused the day she met Adrian. She was 25, bright-eyed, and working for a small boutique firm in Manhattan. He had walked in as a potential client, already rising fast in the tech industry. Adrian was polished, confident, and magnetic. He seemed to fill every corner of the room with his powerful presence. Iris remembered how he smiled at her sketches, how he complimented her ideas about making corporate spaces feel more human. His attention felt like sunlight after years of living in the shadows. When he asked her out to dinner, she said yes without a moment's hesitation. The whirlwind that followed was like a fairy tale. Adrian took her to rooftop restaurants, introduced her to powerful friends, and showered her with an attention she had never known. 6 months later, he proposed with a diamond ring that sparkled brighter than any dream she had dared to imagine. At first, their marriage felt perfect. Adrian bought her a townhouse with white stone steps and elegant French windows. He told her not to worry about work, not to stress herself with clients. "You don't need to prove anything anymore," he had said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You have me." She believed him. She gave up her career, pouring her energy into building their home, supporting his late nights at the office, and hosting dinner parties where she played the gracious wife. For years, Iris lived in Adrian's shadow, telling herself it was enough. But shadows have a way of swallowing the light. Adrian's ambition grew darker as his company expanded. He spent more nights at the office, came home smelling of a cologne that wasn't his, and dismissed her questions with cold, dismissive laughter. When she asked if something was wrong, he accused her of being paranoid, unstable, and ungrateful. She began to doubt herself, silencing the intuition that screamed the truth at her. The day she found the receipt for a lace lingerie set hidden in his gym bag, her chest tightened with a cold dread. It wasn't her size. It wasn't even close. When she confronted him, Adrian sneered. "You're imagining things, Iris. Stop acting hysterical." But she wasn't. Within weeks, the whispers became undeniable. Tessa, a junior project manager at Vidian, was suddenly promoted, suddenly appearing by Adrian's side at business functions. The world pretended not to notice, but Iris felt the betrayal in every corner of her vast, empty home. The divorce was brutal. Adrian's lawyers painted her as unstable, extravagant, and clinging to a man who had outgrown her. He kept the house, the company shares, even the furniture they had chosen together. She was left with a modest settlement and a hollowed-out sense of self. For months, Iris drifted in a fog of grief. She rented a small apartment with peeling paint and a view of a brick alley. She avoided old friends who only saw her as Adrian's discarded wife. She stared at the ceiling at night, wondering if she had wasted her best years on a man who had never really loved her. There were mornings when she couldn't even get out of bed, afternoons when she cried into cold coffee, and nights when she thought she might never feel whole again. But rock bottom has a way of stripping away all illusions. One morning, Iris looked at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying, but beneath the exhaustion, she caught a glimmer of the girl who had once dared to dream. She thought of her parents who had sacrificed everything so she could build a future. She thought of the sketches she used to draw on napkins, the ideas that had once filled her with fire. And she made a choice. She would not be Adrian's shadow anymore. Slowly, painfully, Iris began to rebuild. She took on small freelance design projects for friends, a cousin's office, a neighbor's cafe. Word spread about her unique style, which was warm, personal, and infused with soul. She didn't chase money or prestige. She built spaces that told stories, and clients loved her for it. Within a year, she had enough work to rent a proper studio. Within 2, her name began circulating in circles that Adrian could no longer control. And that was when fate brought her into contact with Alexander Blackwell. He had hired her to redesign his Manhattan penthouse. He was skeptical at first, but soon captivated by her vision. Unlike Adrian, Alexander listened. He valued her input and respected her craft. They worked late into the nights, not with flirtation, but with a deep mutual respect, and slowly a quiet trust grew between them. When the invitation to the Vidian Gala arrived, Iris almost threw it away. She didn't want to step back into Adrian's world again, but Alexander had encouraged her. "You've earned the right to be seen, Iris," he told her. "Don't hide. Walk in there and remind them who you are." So she had chosen the emerald gown, zipped it up with trembling hands, and told herself that tonight was not about Adrian. It was about reclaiming her story. And yet, as she stood at the threshold of the ballroom, Alexander's steady arm linked with hers, Iris felt the weight of her past pressing down. She wondered if she was strong enough. She wondered if she could face the man who had broken her. Then the doors opened, and the gasps of the crowd answered her question before she could. For across the room, Adrian's eyes locked on hers, and the war that neither of them expected was about to begin. The St. Regis Hotel had hosted its share of powerful gatherings. But tonight, it felt like the center of the universe. The Vidian Dynamics annual gala was not just a corporate event. It was a spectacle, a stage where fortunes were flaunted, alliances were cemented, and reputations were destroyed in a single whispered rumor. For Adrian Calloway, it was supposed to be his crowning night. For Iris, it was the battlefield where she would reclaim her dignity. The ballroom stretched like a cathedral of excess. Crystal chandeliers hung heavy from the vaulted ceiling, dripping golden light onto mirrored tables lined with orchids imported from Singapore. Silver candelabras flickered against walls draped in silk. The scent of expensive perfume Chanel, Dior, Tom Ford mingled with the sharp tang of champagne. A string quartet played from a raised platform, their music elegant but faintly drowned by the hum of conversation. This was no ordinary crowd. Tonight's guest list read like the financial pages of tomorrow's news. CEOs of rival firms, foreign dignitaries, venture capitalists, Hollywood faces invited for glamour, and journalists eager to catch the headline moment that always seemed to erupt at Vidian events. At the center of it all was Adrian, moving with the ease of a man who believed the room belonged to him. He shook hands with investors, whispered in the ears of politicians, and let cameras capture his every move. With Tessa by his side, she dazzled in crimson silk, her youthful beauty an accessory Adrian wielded like a trophy. To him, she was not just a mistress. She was proof he had upgraded, a living reminder that he could discard his past and build a shinier future. For Iris, standing just inside the entrance, the atmosphere was suffocating yet electrifying. The air was thick with judgment. She felt the eyes on her, some shocked, some curious, some pitying. Every whisper felt like a knife. That's his ex-wife. She looks different. Who is she with? But then she felt Alexander's steady presence beside her. His arm was firm, his expression calm, almost defiant. While others stared, he looked only at her with unshaken respect. "Ignore them," he murmured, his voice low enough for her alone. "You belong here more than he does." Together, they stepped deeper into the ballroom. The sound of their arrival spread quickly. Conversations faltered. Investors excused themselves mid-sentence to glance at the new arrival. Cameras turned away from Adrian and Tessa, swiveling toward Iris and Alexander. Adrian noticed. From across the room, he froze, the practiced smile slipping from his face. For the first time in years, the ground beneath him didn't feel steady. He had expected Iris to disappear into obscurity, to fade into irrelevance. Yet here she was, radiant, arm in arm with the one man whose shadow loomed even larger than his own. The symbolism was undeniable. Adrian had flaunted his mistress. Iris had walked in with a billionaire. The gala had become a chessboard, and suddenly Adrian realized he was not the only player. The tension didn't escape the crowd. Murmurs grew louder. Investors began shifting allegiances, inching toward Alexander with eager smiles. Journalists scribbled notes furiously, sensing a scandal worth front-page coverage. Even the string quartet seemed to falter, their bows trembling on the strings as if caught in the gravity of the moment. Iris felt every eye, every whisper. But instead of shrinking, she lifted her chin higher. For years, she had been Adrian's accessory. Quiet, compliant, forgettable. Tonight, she was something else entirely. Her emerald gown shimmered under the chandeliers, her presence undeniable. And as she smiled faintly, it wasn't just for Alexander. It was for herself. Adrian, desperate to regain control, raised his glass and forced a laugh that sounded brittle. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice louder than necessary. "Thank you for joining us tonight as Vidian Dynamics celebrates another year of innovation and success." Applause followed, polite but half-hearted as eyes still darted toward Iris. Adrian cleared his throat, gripping Tessa's hand tightly as though to anchor himself. "We are proud to unveil our latest expansion into global markets. Tonight is not just about the past, but about the future we are building together." But even as he spoke, his gaze kept flickering back to Iris. He couldn't stop. She was the ghost of everything he thought he had buried. Now she was standing in the very room he wanted to dominate. And worse, she was no ghost at all. She was flesh, blood, and power, backed by a man who could topple him with a single signature. At the rear of the ballroom, reporters exchanged knowing looks. This gala would not be remembered for Adrian's speech. It would be remembered for the woman he had discarded and the billionaire who kissed her in front of the world. As the night stretched on, tension wove through the air like smoke. Investors drifted toward Iris and Alexander, eager to shake hands and whisper possibilities of partnerships. Tessa's smile tightened as she realized the spotlight she had craved was slipping through her fingers. And Adrian, though he kept his tuxedoed composure, felt the slow unraveling of the empire he thought he controlled. Iris, however, felt something unexpected. For the first time since her marriage crumbled, she felt power. Not in the applause, not in the whispers, but in the quiet knowledge that she no longer needed Adrian's validation. She was here because she had chosen to be, not because anyone invited her as a spouse or an accessory. The chandeliers above sparkled brighter, the music swelled. But beneath the glamour, the gala had transformed into a battlefield. Every glance was a weapon. Every whisper was a bullet. And every step Iris took was a declaration that she was no longer the broken woman Adrian had left behind. What none of them knew, what not even Alexander suspected, was that the night was about to tilt even further. Because Iris had come to the gala not just to be seen, but with a plan that would shatter Adrian's carefully built illusion once and for all. And the first move of that plan would unfold before the champagne glasses were even emptied. If the ballroom was a theater, Adrian Calloway was used to playing the lead. For years, he had curated his role. The ambitious CEO, the visionary leader, the charming host who knew exactly when to laugh and when to crush a competitor with a perfectly timed remark. But tonight, under the crystal chandeliers of the St. Regis, the mask was beginning to slip. Adrian had built his empire on perception. He understood that in business, money mattered, but image mattered more. He cultivated charm like a weapon, using his smile as easily as others used a blade. But underneath the polish lived a man whose hunger for power was insatiable, whose arrogance had corroded every trace of loyalty. He didn't just want success. He wanted dominance, the kind that left others scrambling in his shadow. That hunger was what drew him to Tessa. Tessa Hart was 24, ambitious, and unashamed of it. She wasn't born into money. She wasn't groomed for high society. She clawed her way into Adrian's orbit through Vidian Dynamics' internship program, catching his attention not with brilliance, but with boldness. She knew how to flatter, how to laugh at his jokes, how to make him feel like the center of the universe. And Adrian, who thrived on adoration, drank it in. To him, Iris had become a mirror of restraint. She questioned his choices, reminded him of humility, and carried herself with a dignity he could no longer admire. Tessa, on the other hand, was fire. She validated his ego, encouraged his recklessness, and never asked him to be less. In her eyes, he was the king he always believed himself to be. That was why he flaunted her at the gala. She wasn't just a date. She was a statement. Walking in with Tessa on his arm told the world that Adrian was bold enough to replace the past, arrogant enough to rewrite the rules, and powerful enough not to care who disapproved. But the moment Iris entered with Alexander Blackwell, the statement backfired spectacularly. Tessa noticed it immediately. She felt Adrian's hand stiffen around hers, saw his gaze lock across the ballroom. His carefully rehearsed smile faltered, replaced by something raw, something close to fear. Her own smile wavered before she forced it back into place. She wasn't naive. She knew exactly who Iris was and what her sudden appearance meant. Still, Tessa wasn't the kind of woman to shrink in the background. If Adrian faltered, she would compensate. She leaned closer to him, pressing her lips against his ear. "Don't look rattled," she whispered sharply, her voice sweet for the cameras, but edged with steel. "They're all watching you. Control the room." Adrian forced a laugh that was too loud and raised his glass again, but the cracks were visible now, and Tessa could feel the shift in the air. Investors who had been fawning over them minutes ago were drifting toward Iris and Alexander. Photographers who had begged for her angle were now circling the entrance. The spotlight she had craved all evening was slipping away. Tessa's jaw tightened. This was not the plan. Her mind worked quickly. If Adrian's ex-wife thought she could humiliate them, Tessa would not let it stand. She touched Adrian's arm again, this time more firmly. "Smile. Kiss me," she hissed through clenched teeth. He hesitated, but obeyed. He bent down and pressed his lips against hers. The cameras flashed, capturing the scene, but instead of admiration, the crowd's whispers grew harsher. Investors turned their heads. The kiss didn't look passionate. It looked desperate, staged by a man scrambling to prove he wasn't shaken. Adrian pulled away, frustration flashing in his eyes. Tessa realized in that moment something she had never considered before. Adrian needed her less than she needed him. His empire gave her access, status, and wealth. But without him, she was just another ambitious woman with sharp heels and a sharper tongue. She had tied her future to his. And now that future was trembling under the weight of a single woman's return. Still, Tessa wasn't ready to lose. She had clawed her way up from nothing, and she wasn't about to let Iris steal what she had earned. As the string quartet swelled, she leaned close to Adrian again. If she thinks she can win, prove her wrong. Show them who you are. Don't let her take the night. Adrian clenched his jaw. He hated the fact that she was right. For the first time in his career, he wasn't controlling the narrative. He was reacting, and that weakness was visible to everyone in the room. He needed to reclaim his throne before the whispers turned into headlines. "Fine," he muttered. "Then watch me." With that, Adrian straightened his shoulders, forcing confidence back into his posture. He guided Tessa toward the investors nearest Alexander, a bold move meant to reassert dominance. His plan was simple. Insert himself into the conversation, and remind the world that he was still the man with the power. But as he approached, he caught Alexander's laugh. It was deep, confident, and effortless. Iris was smiling, too. Her head tilted slightly toward Alexander as though she had never been happier. The sight cut deeper than any business rivalry ever had. Adrian's chest tightened with something ugly, something he hadn't felt in years. Insecurity. The closer he drew, the more he realized the truth. It wasn't just that Iris was back. It was that she no longer belonged to him. Not in any sense. And the man beside her wasn't a rebound or a prop. He was someone powerful enough to threaten everything Adrian had built. Tessa squeezed his arm again, trying to anchor him, but Adrian barely felt it. His world, the one he thought he controlled, was beginning to slip away inch by inch, right in front of his eyes. And when Alexander turned, locking eyes with him, and raised his glass in a silent toast, Adrian understood that the real war had only just begun. The air inside the ballroom was thick, charged like the moment before a storm breaks. Every clink of glass, every murmur, every camera flash seemed to echo louder than usual. It was as if the entire St. Regis Hotel had paused, waiting for something to explode. And explode it did. Adrian Calloway had been circling the room like a restless predator, dragging Tessa along at his side. His plan was to insert himself into conversations, reclaim attention, and show the crowd that he was still the center of gravity. But Iris's presence was too powerful. Wherever she moved, eyes followed. Whenever she spoke, people leaned closer, and Alexander Blackwell never left her side, his quiet authority making Adrian look smaller with every passing second. Adrian finally snapped. As Iris stood speaking with a group of investors, men Adrian had been grooming for months, he strode forward, Tessa's heels clicking desperately behind him. His voice cut through the music, louder than it needed to be. "Iris," he said, his smile sharp but brittle. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight." The group fell silent. Conversations halted. All eyes turned. Cameras lifted. Iris turned slowly, her emerald gown glimmering under the chandelier. Her face was calm, composed, though Adrian could see the flicker of fire in her eyes. "Adrian," she said evenly, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by the circle around them. "I was invited." A ripple of whispers ran through the crowd. Invited. Not crashing. Not begging. Invited. Adrian's jaw tightened. He forced a laugh. "Well, I'm glad you're here. It's important for people to see that we've both moved on." He gestured to Tessa, who stepped forward, her crimson gown catching the light. "This is Tessa, my partner. She's been an incredible support to me and to Vidian Dynamics." Tessa smiled, though her hand trembled slightly on Adrian's arm. She was ready for admiration, ready for gasps of approval. Instead, the crowd's gaze remained fixed on Iris, waiting to see what she would say. Iris tilted her head. "Partner? Is that what you're calling it now?" The words were soft, almost casual, but they landed like a blade. A few gasps broke through the silence. Adrian's ears burned. He clenched his glass so tightly he thought it might shatter. Alexander, standing at Iris's side, finally spoke. His voice was smooth, steady, carrying the weight of someone used to commanding a room. "Interesting choice of words, Adrian, because from where I'm standing, Iris looks like the only true partner anyone would be lucky to have." The crowd reacted instantly. Some laughed softly, others exchanged glances. Adrian's throat tightened. Alexander had just humiliated him without raising his voice, and the room had witnessed every second of it. Adrian tried to recover. "Well, Iris has always had a flair for dramatics. I suppose she couldn't resist making an appearance tonight." But before Iris could answer, a journalist shouted from the edge of the circle. "Miss Calloway, are you and Mr. Blackwell here together?" Cameras erupted, flashing like lightning. The question sliced the room open, and suddenly everyone leaned in. This was the headline moment they had been waiting for. Iris glanced at Alexander, who gave the faintest nod as if to say, "Your choice, your power." She turned back to the crowd, her smile calm, measured, and devastating. "Yes," she said. "We're here together." The flashes intensified. Gasps turned into a roar of whispers. Adrian's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Alexander leaned down and kissed Iris on the cheek, lingering just long enough for the cameras to capture it. The ballroom erupted. Guests whispered furiously. Investors exchanged looks, and journalists scribbled frantically. The image of Iris, once Adrian's quiet, discarded wife, now radiant beside his most feared competitor, was more powerful than any press release. It was a public humiliation Adrian hadn't seen coming. Tessa's nails dug into Adrian's arm. "Do something," she hissed through clenched teeth, her smile still plastered on for the cameras. Adrian's pride flared. His empire, his image, his control, all of it was slipping. He straightened, raising his voice so it carried above the crowd. "Let's not forget," he said sharply, "that Iris is my ex-wife. She wouldn't even be here if not for everything I built. Don't let appearances fool you. Some people only shine because they're standing in someone else's light." The words hung in the air like poison. The crowd stiffened. Gasps rang out. Adrian had crossed a line, and he knew it too late. Iris's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained calm. "You're right, Adrian. I was standing in someone else's light once, but tonight I'm standing in my own." The room erupted in applause, soft at first, then louder as more guests joined. Adrian's face twisted, his composure cracking. He tried to smile, but the applause wasn't for him. It was for her. Tessa's smile faltered completely, her crimson lips pressed thin, her body rigid with fury. She had dreamed of this night, of being the star beside Adrian. Instead, she was invisible, eclipsed by the very woman she had once mocked. Adrian's chest tightened. He looked around, desperate for support, but everywhere he turned, eyes avoided him. Investors drifted toward Iris and Alexander. Journalists crowded for quotes. His empire of perception was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But even in his humiliation, Adrian's mind was racing. He wasn't about to lose. If Iris wanted a war, he would give her one. He would not be outshone. Not by her, not by anyone. And as the applause roared around him, Adrian whispered under his breath a promise only he could hear. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. The applause that had filled the ballroom after Iris's defiant words still echoed in her ears long after it faded. Guests had smiled at her. Journalists had scribbled every detail, and Alexander had stood tall beside her like a shield. On the surface, she looked radiant, composed, untouchable. But inside, the weight of the night pressed down harder than she had anticipated. It wasn't just Adrian's words that cut her. It was the memories they dragged back, the ones she had buried but never truly erased. As she smiled for the crowd, Iris felt a tremor run through her chest, a reminder that strength, no matter how convincing, was sometimes just a mask. Hours later, when the gala finally began to thin and the orchestra packed away their instruments, Iris excused herself. Alexander had been pulled into a conversation with a board member, and though his eyes followed her with concern, she assured him she only needed a moment. She slipped away from the glittering ballroom into the quiet hallway beyond, her heels clicking against the marble until the sound of laughter and music became a faint murmur behind her. She found an empty lounge tucked near the far end of the hotel, a space draped in velvet curtains and lined with mirrors. Sitting on the edge of a chaise, Iris finally let herself exhale. Her hands trembled as she removed her diamond necklace, setting it on the table beside her. The emerald gown that had made her feel invincible hours earlier now felt like heavy armor pressing down on her chest. Alone, she allowed the tears to come. It wasn't fair. All the nights she had cried into pillows while Adrian was out with Tessa. All the mornings she woke up in an empty bed, convincing herself that his late hours were for the good of their future. All the times she doubted her own worth because he made her believe she wasn't enough. The humiliation of the divorce hearings replayed in her mind. The lawyers dissecting her life as though she were a burden, a failed wife clinging to scraps. She remembered the whispers of friends who had drifted away, the way some had looked at her with pity, others with judgment. She remembered being alone in her tiny apartment, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, asking herself if she had wasted the best years of her life on a man who had never truly loved her. And tonight, though she had walked in strong, though she had stolen the spotlight, Adrian's words still pierced her heart. Some people only shine because they're standing in someone else's light. What if he was right? The thought was like poison spreading through her veins. What if her moment tonight wasn't her own? What if it was only because of Alexander? Because of the way he kissed her, because of the whispers that she was now connected to a billionaire rival? Would anyone have looked at her twice if she had walked in alone? The questions gnawed at her, tearing at the fragile confidence she had built. For a moment, the woman who had walked into the gala seemed like a stranger, and the broken, discarded wife she thought she had left behind resurfaced. Her chest heaved as she buried her face in her hands. She hated that Adrian still had this power over her. Hated that even after everything, his voice echoed in her mind. For all her strength, all her rebuilding, one cruel sentence had unraveled her. The sound of footsteps broke through her thoughts. Iris quickly wiped her tears, straightening her posture, trying to rebuild the mask before anyone saw. But when the door opened, it wasn't a journalist or a stranger. It was Lena, her closest friend, the one who had zipped up her emerald gown earlier that night. Lena's eyes softened instantly. "I knew I'd find you here." She closed the door and crossed the room, kneeling in front of Iris. You were incredible tonight. Don't let him steal that from you. Iris's voice cracked. What if he's right, Lena? What if I only look strong because of Alexander? What if without him, I'm still nothing? Lena grabbed her hands firmly. Don't you dare believe that. Alexander admires you because of who you are. He didn't hand you power, Iris. You already had it. He just reminded you to use it. The words sank in, but the ache remained. Iris pressed her lips together, fighting another wave of tears. I thought I was past this. I thought I was stronger. But when Adrian looked at me, it felt like I was back in that courtroom, back in that house, back to being the woman he broke. Lena's grip tightened. Then maybe this is the moment you decide once and for all that he doesn't get to break you again. Not tonight, not ever. Silence filled the lounge, heavy but healing. Iris leaned back, closing her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to feel the exhaustion, the rawness of standing in front of the world and pretending not to bleed. But she also felt something else stirring beneath the pain. A flicker of defiance, faint, but alive. Adrian's words had wounded her, yes, but they had also reminded her of why she had come. This wasn't just about showing up. This was about reclaiming every piece of herself he had tried to erase. Lena stood and offered her a hand. Come back with me. Let them see you walk out of here with your head high. Don't give him the satisfaction of knowing he got under your skin. Iris hesitated, staring at her reflection in the mirror across the room. Her eyes were red, her mascara smudged, but beneath the mess was something familiar. A glimmer of the woman she had once dreamed of becoming. Strong, independent, unshaken by the shadows of men who underestimated her. She wiped her face with a tissue, reapplied her lipstick with trembling hands, and stood. The emerald gown caught the light again, no longer heavy, but a reminder of why she was here. As she and Lena walked back toward the ballroom, Iris's heart still ached, but her resolve began to steady. She knew Adrian wasn't finished. She knew tonight was only the beginning. And when the doors of the ballroom came back into view, she realized Adrian was already planning his next move, one that could destroy her if she wasn't ready. When Iris stepped back into the ballroom, her cheeks were still faintly flushed from tears, but her chin was lifted with quiet defiance. She was different. She was no longer hiding in the shadows of humiliation. Something inside her had shifted. Adrian might have rattled her, but he hadn't broken her. Not this time. But Adrian didn't know that. From across the room, he saw her return and mistook the faint redness around her eyes for weakness. He leaned closer to Tessa, his voice a low growl. She's slipping. Good. Now watch me finish her. He excused himself from a cluster of investors and strode back toward the center of the ballroom where Iris and Alexander now stood near the silent auction tables. The chandeliers cast golden light over the crowd, making every tense movement feel like a scene on stage. Everyone could sense something was coming, though none knew just how explosive it would be. Still parading around, Iris? Adrian sneered as he approached, his smile sharp for the cameras. Tell me, what exactly do you do these days? Oh, right. Nothing. Unless hanging on to Alexander counts as an occupation. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Tessa smirked at Iris as if savoring the blow. Adrian stood taller, convinced he had regained control. But Iris didn't flinch. She glanced at Alexander, who gave her the faintest nod. And then she turned back to Adrian. Her voice was steady, her words crisp. Funny you should ask, she said. Because while you've been busy flaunting your mistress, I've been busy working. Adrian chuckled darkly. Working at what? Decorating coffee shops. You couldn't possibly understand the kind of deals I handle. Iris's emerald eyes burned. Actually, Adrian, I think you'll find I understand better than you realize. because one of those deals you've been chasing. It's mine now." The crowd froze. Adrian blinked, thrown off balance. "What are you talking about?" Alexander stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority that made entire boardrooms tremble. "She's talking about the Blackwell-Vidian contract, the one you thought was in your pocket. Iris is my partner in the project, Adrian. She designed the entire concept for our expansion. Her name is on every blueprint, every signature." The silence that followed was deafening. Investors looked at each other, jaws slack. Reporters scrambled to jot notes. Adrian's face drained of color. "No," he said, shaking his head. "That's not possible." "That deal was supposed to be yours," Iris interrupted, her voice steady but sharp. "It was, until you underestimated me. Until you underestimated what I could build without you." The words hit like a thunderclap. For years, Adrian had dismissed Iris as nothing more than a trophy wife, someone who smiled at dinners and played hostess in a home he claimed as his own. Now, in front of everyone, she had revealed that she wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. And not in his shadow, but as his direct rival. The crowd erupted in whispers. Investors who had once leaned toward Adrian now leaned toward Alexander and Iris. The balance of power had shifted in an instant. Tessa's smirk faltered. She tugged at Adrian's arm. "Tell me this isn't true," she hissed, her eyes darting nervously to the journalists circling them. But Adrian was frozen. His mind raced, searching for a lifeline. He had assumed Iris was nothing without him, that she would fade into obscurity after the divorce. Now she had returned not as an afterthought but as a threat. A threat with the power to dismantle his empire piece by piece. "I don't believe you," Adrian spat finally. "This is a stunt, a show." Alexander stepped closer, his presence towering. "Believe it or don't, Adrian, it doesn't change the truth. The deal is already signed. The boardrooms know. And now, so does everyone else." Adrian's lips parted, but no words came. He was cornered, trapped. The humiliation he had tried to inflict on Iris had backfired spectacularly. Iris, however, didn't gloat. She simply looked at him, her voice quiet but unyielding. "You once told me I was nothing without you. Tonight I proved I'm stronger without you than I ever was with you." The ballroom erupted in applause, louder than before. This time not just polite, but genuine, almost thunderous. Journalists snapped photos, investors murmured about new partnerships, and the orchestra, sensing the climax of the drama, struck up a triumphant tune. Adrian's face twisted with rage. Tessa pulled at his sleeve, desperate to escape the spotlight, but he stood rooted in place, glaring at Iris as though his hatred alone could burn her to ash. Iris turned, slipping her arm back through Alexander's, her head held high. She felt the rush of vindication, the sweet taste of reclaiming her voice after years of silence. But beneath the victory, she knew something dangerous had been unleashed. Adrian wasn't just humiliated. He was wounded. And a man like him didn't lick his wounds quietly. As she and Alexander began to move toward the exit, Iris caught Adrian's eyes one last time. They weren't filled with defeat. They were filled with something darker, sharper. And in that moment, she knew this battle was far from over. Adrian was already plotting his revenge. The night of the gala had changed everything. Iris's revelation about her partnership with Alexander Blackwell was already rippling through the city's most powerful circles. Headlines lit up the digital feeds before she even left the hotel. Ex-wife of Vidian CEO emerges as Blackwell partner. Adrian Calloway outshined by Iris's stunning comeback. But for Iris, the moment wasn't just about humiliating Adrian. It was about proving something to herself. That she was no longer the fragile, discarded woman crying in an empty apartment. That she could stand tall, not because of Alexander's presence, but because she had rebuilt her life piece by piece with her own 2 hands. Still, the glow of victory quickly gave way to reality. Public applause was fleeting. Adrian was dangerous, and she knew he wouldn't accept defeat quietly. If she was truly going to survive this new war, she needed to do more than just make a statement. She needed to transform. And so, Iris began the process of becoming someone Adrian could never again dismiss. Her mornings no longer started with doubt, but with purpose. At dawn, she sat at her desk with coffee and sketches, refining her designs. The little studio she had once rented on borrowed money now buzzed with energy, filled with assistants eager to learn her craft. Projects poured in. Luxury penthouses, boutique hotels, corporate headquarters. Each one carried her signature warmth, her ability to turn cold spaces into homes, sterile halls into sanctuaries. Clients praised her not just for her artistry, but for her resilience. She embraced the role of a leader. No longer hiding behind politeness, she negotiated contracts with sharp precision, refusing to be undervalued. For years, Adrian had told her she didn't understand business. Now she was building one that rivaled his, fueled not by ego, but by authenticity. But Iris's transformation wasn't just professional. It was deeply personal. She changed her look, not for vanity, but for armor. Gone were the muted dresses Adrian once preferred. The soft tones, he said, made her presentable. Now she chose bold colors, tailored suits, and gowns that commanded attention. Her hair, once tied back neatly to please him, flowed freely, styled to reflect her independence. When she entered a room, people no longer saw a wife. They saw a force. She rebuilt her inner world, too. Therapy sessions became part of her routine, peeling away the years of gaslighting and manipulation Adrian had left behind. She confronted the voice inside her head that still whispered she wasn't enough. Slowly, she silenced it, replacing it with a stronger truth. She was more than enough. Even in her personal relationships, Iris set new boundaries. Lena remained her closest confidant, reminding her that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but strength. Alexander, too, became more than just a business ally. His respect never wavered. His support never felt possessive. Unlike Adrian, Alexander didn't try to control her. He celebrated her independence. He wasn't the reason for her transformation, but he was proof that a real partnership was possible. Together, they became a formidable team. Blackwell's influence paired with Iris's vision created projects that reshaped the city skyline. Every success chipped away at Adrian's empire. Every headline eroded his carefully constructed image. But Iris's transformation wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about freedom. For the first time in years, she laughed without fear, walked without hesitation, and dreamed without apology. She realized that Adrian's betrayal had not ended her life. It had forced her to find her true self. Still, victory carried its shadows. With every success came whispers that Adrian was planning something. He had retreated from the spotlight since the gala, but his silence felt more dangerous than his insults. Investors who once praised him now hesitated. Rumors spread of erratic meetings and outbursts behind closed doors. Iris didn't underestimate him. She knew Adrian too well. He wouldn't stop until he found a way to strike back. That knowledge only pushed her harder. She poured herself into her work, into building a brand so untouchable that even Adrian's wrath couldn't dismantle it. She gave interviews, sharing her story, not as a victim, but as a survivor. Her words resonated with women across the city. Women who had been silenced, underestimated, and discarded. She became more than a designer. She became a symbol. At one keynote event, standing before hundreds of entrepreneurs, she spoke from the stage with a voice steady and clear. For years, I was told I was nothing without a man. Tonight, I tell you this, you are never nothing. You are the foundation, the builder, the creator of your own light. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Backstage, Alexander smiled at her. You've become unstoppable. But Iris shook her head gently. Not unstoppable, just finally awake. Her transformation reached its peak the night she unveiled her latest project. The redesign of Blackwell Tower, a skyscraper set to redefine Manhattan's skyline. The unveiling gala was scheduled for spring, and the city buzzed with anticipation. For Iris, it was more than a project. It was proof that she had claimed her place in a world Adrian once swore she couldn't survive. Yet beneath the triumph, a chill lingered. Adrian had been silent for too long. She knew him well enough to recognize the signs. A storm was brewing, and her reinvention, no matter how strong, would be tested in ways she hadn't imagined. As she stood in her studio one late evening reviewing blueprints under the soft glow of a desk lamp, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The words were short, chilling, unmistakable. Enjoy your empire, Iris, because soon I'll take it all back. Her breath caught. Her hand tightened around the phone. And in that moment, she knew Adrian's revenge wasn't just coming. It had already begun. The months that followed the St. Regis Gala were a slow unraveling for Adrian Calloway. His empire, once untouchable, began to crack under the weight of suspicion, betrayal, and his own pride. But it wasn't just chance. It was Iris. Step by step, move by move, she and Alexander Blackwell had built the perfect counterattack, and Adrian never saw it coming. The stage for his downfall was set at Vidian Dynamics' annual shareholder conference, an event even more critical than the gala. Investors flew in from London, Tokyo, and Dubai. The media filled the hall, cameras ready to capture the future of one of the most powerful companies in America. Adrian had planned to use the event to reassert dominance, to prove that despite the gossip, he remained in control. But Iris had other plans. She arrived not as a guest this time, but as a keynote speaker introduced by Alexander himself. Her name appeared on the massive screen behind the stage, Iris Calloway, design visionary and partner, Blackwell Innovations. The crowd erupted in applause, louder than Adrian's opening remarks had received. For him, it was déjà vu, the humiliation of the gala repeating in an even more public forum. Iris stepped onto the stage in a tailored white suit, her presence commanding. She spoke with clarity and conviction, presenting her joint project with Blackwell, an urban redevelopment initiative that promised not only massive profit, but also social impact. Her slides showed skyscrapers designed to be sustainable, luxurious, yet accessible spaces that embodied both vision and humanity. The investors leaned forward, captivated. Journalists typed furiously. Adrian, seated at the head of the panel, felt his stomach churn. This was his nightmare. Iris, shining brighter than he ever had, her vision eclipsing his own. When she concluded, the applause shook the hall. Cameras flashed like fireworks. And then, as if choreographed by fate itself, Alexander rose and joined her on stage. He placed a hand on her shoulder, then turned to the audience. Tonight, he said, we announce that Blackwell Innovations and Iris Calloway have secured the majority contracts that Vidian Dynamics has been chasing for the past year. These projects are ours, and we are only getting started. The crowd erupted. Investors who had sat loyal to Adrian now whispered eagerly to one another, calculating how quickly they could switch allegiances. Adrian shot to his feet, his face red. This is sabotage, he shouted, his voice cracking. These projects were mine. She stole them. The hall fell silent. Every camera turned to him, capturing the image of a man unraveling. Adrian's outburst was raw, desperate, a public display of weakness he could never erase. Iris turned slowly, her expression calm, measured. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. No, Adrian. You lost them because you were too busy chasing shadows. You underestimated me. And now the future belongs to those who build, not those who destroy. The applause was thunderous. Adrian's chest heaved, his fists clenched, but he could do nothing. The power had slipped through his hands in front of the entire world. And then came the final blow. One of the journalists stood and raised her voice. Mr. Calloway, how do you respond to the leaked documents showing misuse of company funds to cover personal expenses, including luxury gifts and travel for Miss Tessa Hart? The room gasped. Adrian froze. His mind raced. How did they know? He glanced toward Tessa, who sat pale and trembling in the front row. The cameras swung toward her, capturing her shock. More voices rose from the crowd. Is it true, Mr. Calloway? Did company money fund your affair? Are you stepping down as CEO? Adrian's throat went dry. His empire, his image, his carefully crafted mask gone. And Iris, standing tall on the stage beside Alexander, had become the face of his destruction. Security moved toward Tessa as journalists swarmed, flashes blinding. Adrian tried to speak, but his words drowned beneath the roar of scandal breaking in real time. His board members exchanged furious whispers. Some pulled out their phones, already contacting lawyers. Others shook their heads in disgust. Iris watched it all quietly. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. Revenge wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice. Adrian had tried to erase her, but tonight the world watched as he erased himself. The conference ended in chaos. Reporters chased Adrian as he stormed out, Tessa trailing behind him, her face streaked with tears. Shareholders flocked toward Iris and Alexander, eager to secure their future with the winners of the night. The once untouchable king of Vidian dynamics was reduced to a man cornered, exposed, and utterly powerless. Backstage, Iris finally allowed herself a breath. Lena hugged her fiercely. You did it. You finally did it. But Iris shook her head softly. This isn't about me winning. It's about finally being free. Alexander joined them, his voice low but steady. Adrian won't take this quietly. Men like him never do. Iris nodded, her eyes still burning with determination. I know, but tonight, for the first time, I'm not afraid. Outside the hall, cameras still flashed. Headlines spread like wildfire. Adrian Calloway exposed. Iris Calloway's stunning rise. The city buzzed with the fall of a king and the rise of a woman he once thought powerless. Yet, even as she walked away from the chaos, Iris felt a chill in her chest. Adrian was finished in the public eye, yes, but he wasn't gone. A man like him, stripped of pride and power, was dangerous in ways no one could predict. And deep down, Iris knew the final confrontation between them was still waiting, one last battle that would decide everything. Years passed, not in a blur, but in a series of beautifully lived moments. Iris and Alexander's partnership, built on a foundation of respect, blossomed into a deep and unwavering love. They married in a quiet ceremony in the Queen's botanical garden, a nod to the humble roots that kept Iris grounded. There were no flashing cameras, no power players, just family, Lena, and the quiet promise of a shared future. They built a home together, a space filled not with expensive trinkets, but with art, books, and the sound of laughter. Iris launched a foundation dedicated to supporting women rebuilding their lives after divorce and betrayal, funding scholarships for young designers and creating pathways she wished she'd had. Her story became her legacy. Strength, she told them in auditoriums filled with hopeful faces, isn't about never falling. It's about choosing to rebuild when everything inside you says you can't. One spring evening, Iris stood on the balcony of her home, overlooking the city skyline she had helped shape. The cool air washed over her as she thought of the girl she once was, the one who cried into her pillow, who doubted she would ever stand again. Then she thought of the woman she had become. She whispered softly to herself, as if sealing the journey, I was never broken. I was just becoming. Behind her, Alexander stepped onto the balcony, sliding his arm gently around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Iris smiled, leaning back against him. "About how far I've come, and how much further I still want to go." They stood in silence, the city glowing like a promise before them. For Iris, the past was no longer a weight. It was a foundation. And on it, she would continue to build, not for revenge, not for validation, but for herself. Her story wasn't just survival. It was a masterpiece of transformation. It was victory. And as the lights of the city flickered like a million tiny stars, Iris knew her message was clear: no woman is ever powerless, not when she decides to rise. This story has finally come to a close. If you're still here, then I know something inside this journey touched your heart in a way words alone cannot explain. Iris's story isn't just about betrayal or revenge. It's about rediscovery, healing, and the quiet strength that comes from refusing to stay broken. Life will always hand us storms. People we trust may betray us, and circumstances we built our lives on may crumble. But what matters is not the fall, it's what we choose to do after. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Iris chose to rise, and in doing so, she discovered her true power. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Adrian thought he was her impediment. In truth, he became the very force that pushed her to build a new, stronger self. That is a lesson all of us can carry into our own lives. Every obstacle, every heartbreak, every betrayal can become the foundation for something greater if we refuse to surrender. So, as you leave this story tonight, I want you to ask yourself, what broken piece of your life can you rebuild into strength? What pain can you transform into purpose? Remember, like Iris, you are not powerless. You are becoming. And now, if this story reached you, if it stirred something deep inside your heart, don't just keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who might need this reminder. Give it a like so more people can find hope in it. And if you want to walk with us through more stories of courage, healing, and transformation, hit that subscribe button and stay close. Because together, we are not just watching stories. We are learning how to rise from our own.